Good to see you again. How are you, sir? Are you well?
Good, man.
Okay, just for the benefit of the people who are with us here and might know who each of you are. Eoin, I'm going to begin with you. Maybe if you could just give us the 30-second version of what you do. Eoin.
Sorry, you're going to have to say that again. I was talking to Dietmar.
Yeah, you were complimenting him on the Gazette.
I was.
Tell us a little bit about what you do in your organisation.
Yeah, so my name is Eoin Fleming. I'm the CIO of the Carne Group, which is a fund essentially of what's called a Superman Co, which has 1 trillion in management. I'm a former CISO.
Recovering CISO.
I'm a recovering CISO. So I decided, so I was a CISO for about 10 years, and the reason I moved again into the CIO world, because there's a lot of crossover, as Dietmar will tell you, because he's both, between the world of a CIO and the world of a CISO. The main difference is, as a CISO, you're always looking for money. As a CIO, you're always the one saying no, or rather the CFO is the one saying no. So I decided to be the one who, for once, isn't the guy looking for money necessarily. He's the guy saying no, because it's a bit of a break from being a CISO.
Okay, fair enough. Whatever floats your boat, as they say. Sarah, do you want to tell us what you do with Salesforce?
Sure, yeah. I'm a director in the security org within the identity and access management space. So work around compliance, access control, governance. So work a lot with audit, risk, and that kind of
Okay, and a big organisation. I mean, how many countries is Salesforce in?
Global organisation. How many what, sorry?
How many countries have you got operations in?
Oh, all over the globe.
Yeah.
I have teams at the moment in the US and India, Ireland, and Italy as well. So it's a broad.
So in other words, you don't deal with the local challenge, you deal with a global challenge. Dietmar, we heard a little bit from you. Paul, if we can just talk to you a little bit about Checkpoint and what you do.
Yeah, sure. No, thanks for having us. So I'm responsible for some of our largest complex accounts. That's everything from design, deployment, run of our technology, everything from traditional network security all the way through to endpoint. So lots of visibility into the challenges.
Cool. I'm going to pick up something that Chris mentioned. First of all, to you, Eoin. He talked about swarms of distraction, which is a wonderful way of describing it. And everybody who's in that space, there's constantly swarms, and you're dealing with what's in front of you as opposed to dealing with perhaps what might come in 6 months' time or a more global view. How do you prevent yourself from being distracted by those swarms, because they're constant in the current environment?
The biggest challenge that you face in IT generally, and it's even more true as a CISO or a CIO, is what is strategic and what is tactical, right? You will always have issues come up 10 times a day, right? The most important thing is, and it was said by an earlier speaker, you focus. The Eisenhower box is actually an amazing tool, right? And I teach it to everybody I work with, right?
If only we had seen it, Chris. I fell out of the deck. But go on.
It's urgent, important, do delegate, right? That's what it is in a nutshell, right? There are things that you need to deal with personally. Those are the do things. There are things that you need to give to your team or to give to somebody else. They're the delegate things, right? You have to keep the end goal in mind, otherwise you will never get there. The NCIS folks said that. That's, it's in every SEAL book you'll ever read. It's in every success book you'll ever read. It's in every self-help book you'll ever read. But if you don't know where you're going, then you will deal with tactical stuff all the time because you don't have an end goal in mind. It's that simple.
Sarah, when an organization is putting cybersecurity programs together, they normally tend to address the issues that we know about now. But the one thing that I've learned from doing this conference over the years is what we know now isn't what we're going to know in 6 months or 12 months' time. So how important is it that you're able to adapt those plans, but also have an eye on that end goal, which is to keep your data secure at all costs?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it needs to be flexible as well. I think the plan, and it needs to be kind of well tested and rounded to kind of cover, the operational aspects of the organization, all areas, kind of from end to end. So you really need to understand the kind of operational flow and the processes within the organization. Have all the stakeholders on board from across the organization to ensure that you've kind of got that buy-in and ownership as well.
How do you manage it with multi-jurisdiction? So in other words, you listed off the countries that you have colleagues working with you in Salesforce. Not all of them have English as their first language. Communications barriers will always be thrown up from time to time. You need to get that buy-in from people at the ground level, otherwise it doesn't work. So how do you overcome that particular challenge, though, so that the foot soldiers in this defense at least know what they're doing?
Yeah, I think somebody mentioned earlier on communication, and obviously awareness and training and security training has to be prevalent within the organisation. Courses, online courses, signing off to say that you've done that, those types of learnings that are required, around regulation and compliance as well. That are obviously very important. That needs to be definitely part of your security program.
If we were to talk, Dietmar, about any of the cybersecurity breaches that have garnered headlines in recent times, any organisation, I mean, most recently you had Virgin Media in this country, had some of their channels taken off air. You had MTU in Cork, which were the university, and their entire system was locked down for weeks. They're still rebuilding it now. You don't know that you're the slowest gazelle until the teeth are actually sinking into your back. So how do you get past that? How do you get to the point at which you're the porcupine?
I mean, one thing is, and we heard some confirmation, you have to have a target which you try to achieve. And to explain to your people, and this is what you also confirmed, you have to have regular training. So by training them, you more or less standardize the understanding what is the target when we talk about compliance, security, risks. What do we mean by that? And by this standardization, and we heard it also in the NCIS speech, you have this kind of same language, and by that the same understanding of what has to be achieved. And if you can transport this one over into the board, that even you're getting confirmation and understanding from the board what is the target we are trying to achieve, and there the standards, if you have a NIST standard or a CIS standard, help you. And that's also the bridge how you can transport the understanding from a technical world into a non-technical world nicely.
I just want to check, just for a quick show of hands in the room here, because we've got a lot of people who are involved in cybersecurity. Who here can honestly say that everybody within their organization is fully aware of the risks that they face on a day-to-day basis from external forces? A show of hands, anyone who says that they can stand over everybody in their business? Not one of you, which is true. Who here thinks that they have done as much as they can do to make their colleagues aware of the risk? Can I just check that your hands are working? If you can just, maybe just show me that, everyone put up their left hand. Okay, their hands are working, right? But that just goes to show you the challenge that is out there. I mean, is that a trust thing, Dietmar? Is that an acceptance of reality that human frailty is the cyber criminal's biggest advantage?
I mean, we heard it in the speeches, it's a people business. And the most, let's say, prominent attack vectors are using users in a company. And it's like a game, and you cannot really, let's say, resolve this because it's a constant development. So you're forced to constantly train your people. You have constantly to review your measures, update the measures. There is a constant change in the organization, and everything what is changing in the organization, you have to review, you have to adjust your measures in security. So it's a permanent game, and it's more a marathon, and there is never an end. So it's a daily challenge which you have to overcome, and this is why all the measures which we heard today is not a single event. It's more or less a repetition, long-term repetition, and you have to have the, let's say, abreast to do this on a daily basis.
Paul, if I can talk to you about getting that balance right. So obviously you guys are involved in every stage in that process. You've got people, you've processes, you've technologies, you're building out security programs. There has to be buy-in from everybody in the chain, from the person at the bottom to the person at the top. How do you achieve a balance there that isn't A, disruptive to the actual job that you're trying to do, B, is secure and robust enough that people know what they're doing, and I suppose ultimately keeps your data safe, even if somebody does manage to get through that first level of security?
Yeah, and it's a good question. I think I changed the word how to can we? Can we get that balance right? Because if you go back to Dietmar's analogy of the house, I think most big, complex, all organizations would probably agree there is a house. I think that's probably where the agreement ends as to how many rooms, what's in the rooms. If you go back to frameworks, we heard Chris and we've heard Dietmar talk about frameworks and standards and methodologies. NIST, CIS, there's hundreds. Problem is, it does drive compliance. And I think everyone realizes compliance as human beings, most humans love to be compliant. They love a tick in a box, you did a good job, you've done it, well done. The challenge is you're running a change program and most humans either are afraid of or resist change. So you end up with a great deal of chaos. And if you use a framework as a good example, NIST talks about the first phase of identify. Most organizations still today cannot reliably define what is in their infrastructure. So if you can't define
and the bigger the organization that is, the more difficult it is to define.
It's hugely difficult. I think it's incredibly easily said. It's phenomenally difficult to deliver. So you end up with different tools, different vendors telling you they can go and discover, they can aggregate, they can give you risk management frameworks, they can do everything. The problem is they can't. And we come back to the people aspect, again, which has been mentioned a number of times. The reality in the industry is, in IT specifically, people and talent has been incredibly underinvested for many years. Skills have not accelerated and developed at the rate of technology. So we have a workforce that isn't necessarily adequately prepared to either deal with the thousands of actions to remediate infrastructure, nor are they capable of keeping up with the pace of change. So you come back to your question, and I say, back to the idea of focus, Eisenhower's quadrant, getting visibility, understanding where critical assets are, having a risk register to go and really tick off those absolutely, impacting events. That is the key. So balance, no. Focus, small steps, progress, not perfection, yes.
Eoin, when it comes to, we're talking about the people down the chain, right? Let's go back to the top of the tree. Look, I'm on boards, people here are on boards. Boards consist of people with various different levels of understanding. And that's where communication is really important, so that the people who are on that board know exactly what you're talking about. Nobody wants to be the chairman getting the call to say, you'll never guess what happened. And then have to turn around afterwards and say, well, why didn't you tell me that this was a risk? So getting buy-in at that high level, it's more important in the bigger organizations, I'm presuming, than it would be if you've got a smaller operation where things can be done more agilely and quickly.
Yeah, I mean, in a small organization, the board are a nebulous concept. You will meet them, all right?
You meet them in the lift.
You meet them in the lift, you meet them in the lobby, you have time with them. In a big organization, you will get, if you're lucky, an hour, probably a quarter with them, right? So you better be sure to make an impact in that hour, and I mean the right kind of impact. Good advice I can give you, bring 2 decks. Bring the crayon deck, which is non-technical.
I'd like to point out I'm a huge fan of the crayon deck,
yeah.
As somebody who doesn't quite get it, but yeah.
The idea, remember that the CFO does not understand IT. He understands balance sheets, right? The rest of the organization has specific focuses. Very few of them at board level will be on IT. They're generalists typically at board level with very deep sectoral expertise in one area, and that area is not IT, and you better bet it's not security, right? There are very few board members with a security background, except in technology companies. That would be the one exception that you would see commonly enough. Bring in the crayon deck, try the crayon deck, right? Which is, this is what we're trying to do, this is why we're trying to do it, these are the key risks you're exposed to, and leave it there. You will get 15 minutes to make your point. You'll be stopped after 5 minutes if they're not getting it, all right? The most important thing is have the scalpel deck as well, all right? Because from personal experience, you walk in, you start the crayon deck, this is how it is, these are the risks, and you find that you've actually misjudged because you don't know the board. First message, know the board. Second thing, know what they focus on. Third thing, don't walk in blind, because you'll have somebody stop you in the middle of the presentation and going, yeah, that's great, but what are you actually doing, all right? That's where you have the scalpel deck in the background. These are the metrics, this is the management, people, process, technology, this is how we're doing everything. If you have those two decks, you'll survive the experience, right? And it'll be safer for you. But you will get probably 15 minutes in total, but you get 5 minutes to make that impression.
Sarah, how important is it that you, I mean, in many ways, with board members and extremely senior executives of big organizations, you have to scare the daylights out of them in some ways, don't you? You have to kind of show them this could all be gone tomorrow unless we put proper procedures and practices in place. I mean, take our own HSE example here. They shut down the entire public health service in a heartbeat that had to be rebuilt from scratch, costing millions upon millions of euro. I mean, that board, if they had their time back, would have listened to a lot more key risk indicators. So do you have to go nuclear, or do you bring them along with you on a more subtle journey?
Yeah, I would say that you would have to emphasize, where the threats are. I mean, I think that's what they want to see. They want to see, the most important risk, how it's going to affect the organization meeting their objectives, and how important it is to them and the organization's goals. And that has to, be kind of obvious as well to them when you're showing, KRIs and that to the board. But yeah, absolutely, I think there needs to be a little bit of that. If this doesn't change or if this isn't actioned, then it's going to have, a detrimental effect on whatever the organization's goals are. And I think even with, the KRIs, they should kind of be based around, aspects that are very important to the business. So for example, if it's data, that's very important to customer data, then, maybe something like KRIs around that. Or if it's high availability systems, to have some kind of a KRI around that you can
do they care at board level more about reputation when it comes to data breach than they do about financial loss?
It should be, I think, broad, and I think, as I mentioned, people, process, technology, they should definitely be, I think, as diverse as turnover in staff to a number of growing threats. So I think it should cover, all those aspects.
Dietmar, the challenge, of course, is bringing them with you then. So, I mean, it's all very well going in and setting it out, but anyone who sits on boards will know, well, that was a lovely presentation, now what's next? And they move on to some other things. So how do you bring them with you on the journey so that your CISO, your CIO get the tools that they need to protect the organization?
I mean, what we did in the last 12 months is we learned that they're reacting on two things. And I'm doing nearly what you're doing, but we are showing them progress. As they don't understand what you're talking about when you become too technical, they're really, really caring, do we progress in the right direction? So we have a spider chart with the 17 CIS criteria. We have a bench where we are. We have a kind of explanation where we should be. And then we show them on a regular basis, okay, these are the measures, forget them, you don't understand this, but this is how we are developing the spider chart, so we show them progress. And this is where they see, oh, they're doing something. We don't understand it, but it looks like they're coming closer and closer to the target. Then you have to tell them, hey, because you're changing the organization, we always have to review, is the target correct? And some changes of the organization might take you also backward. So there is not only a forward step, it's also backward step depending on what you're doing. And something what we figured out, and you brought this example, which recently happened, they're reading newspapers. So what we are doing is we take out of the newspapers before there is a board meeting the most recent
disaster that befell somebody else. Yes,
it's all in their mind, and then we say, if this would happen to us, how would we be protected, and where do we have holes? And this is something what I surprisingly learned. These guys started to understand. And we had in Switzerland, Credit Suisse, somebody, an ex-IT guy stolen salary data. And I said, okay, if you take this example, this is the way how you can steal data in our organization, and this is what we already closed, and these are the open things. Do you agree that we should close the remaining ones? And I got applause, well done, and a high understanding. And this is so damn basic, but it worked.
But it worked, and they saw well, they start questioning what would it mean to us. And more importantly, would I get into trouble if it went wrong? And that is a great motivator. Paul, there's lots of different solutions out there. There's no one solution on the shelf that you can pull down and say, that's grand, that fixes all of our problems. So therefore, the next challenge you have when you're trying to get people to bounce them into this is, well, we need to spend money. Q, absolutely appalling look from someone who is there saying no to you. And here's what we need to spend money on. So the next fight is, well, can we do it with maybe half of that? Or if you had 2/3 of that budget, what would we get? How do you kind of get them back to where they were applauding Dietmar?
Yeah, I'd love to have seen that. No, I think to your point, even Checkpoint doesn't have one technology to fix all issues. No, look, you have to understand the pressures in any organization. To your point, what can they afford? The reality is over the years, many organizations have spent the money. The challenge is they've not realized the value from their spend. You go and look at any organization, they will have, depending on size, millions of dollars of unused technology sat on shelves. Not deployed, not operational, not reducing risk in the organization. Which brings you back to the idea of the risk register. The risk register should inform decisions you take to minimize the greatest impact and threat to your organization. So you should align that thinking, that rationale, to the architecture you have deployed. The reality is, it's overused in cyber terms, but every organization has many, many different tools. Every organization wants to simplify and consolidate. These are known knowns. The challenge is, these change programs can take anywhere between 2 to 5 years to deploy. This is not something you decide and then happens overnight. Mm-hmm. So an understanding of the pressures in terms of what have I spent, what do I have available to me to reduce risk? Where am I architecturally in terms of technical debt? I cannot change quickly if I am a legacy organization with technical debt. I can go quickly if I'm a newer organization, more agile, more access to cloud infrastructures, etc.
But the bigger you are, the more slow-moving you are as a beast.
Typically, yes. Yes. You end up almost claustrophobic in the environment you've set. I work with many large banks globally, and we look at the infrastructure. We've talked about inventory management, asset management. We've talked about the impact of change. And coming back full circle to the question, I think right now is the most energy I've seen in simplification programs at any time in my career. I think there's finally a realization that the effort required is worth the result.
Well, do you know the reason why that is? If it's banks, is because half of the stuff that comes out from cyber criminals trying to get you to log into their systems look more sophisticated than the actual banks themselves.
There can be some of that.
Which is a little bit of a killer. My favorite question to ask anyone in this space, if they're a CIO or a CISO, is what's the thing that keeps you awake at night right now? Sarah, what is it for you?
I suppose there's, lots of different projects going on, I suppose, at the moment that kind of do keep me awake at night. The risks are kind of, they're broad at the moment. There's just a lot, really, to kind of
There's the swarm of distractions, as it was described.
Yeah, from the geopolitical risks, to resourcing kind of shortages, all of those things really kind of combined, I guess. I can't put my finger on kind of any one thing, I suppose.
You're just losing sleep in general. That's okay too.
Yeah.
Owen, for you, is there any one particular thing?
Right now it's phishing. I saw an AI-generated voice. So people think about kind of impersonation in terms of being video and having that kind of overlay, the AI overlay. But actually, a very simple voice. Basically, it can make you sound like anybody, right? So it was released the other day, right? That's terrifying because most of our business is done over the telephone, the traditional telephone, not necessarily, Teams or anything like that or Zoom. The challenge is we run quarterly phishing exercises. If you don't run tests like that, you never know what's out there, right? And we vary between 1% when we do something that's very unsophisticated and basically says, I'm a phishing attack, please report me. And recently we ran one, which by accident was incredibly effective, because we, by accident, used the name of somebody in the organization to do a DocuSign targeted attack, and we got 4%. But actually, I've worked in banks all over the world, and typically you get somewhere between 3% and 7% of the organization responding to that and giving their credentials, right? A single person, so in a 1,000-person organization, that's 70 or 80 people, right? A single person from that will kill your whole company. That's what happened to the HSE, right? So how do you combat that? Education, education, education. Where's the problem always at? It's people. It's always, always, always people.
But it's going to be much harder if you've got AI that's impersonating somebody who they have recognized and they get bounced into something.
Which is why we didn't have badges before, but now we have mandatory badges, because what we do now is when we pick up the phone to somebody on a video call, we ask them to hold up their badge. Right?
Wow. So, okay. That's kind of alarming in many ways. Dietmar, what's keeping you awake?
We did quite a lot of things to improve. But what is for me important is that we also have the capability to react. And it was mentioned in a couple of speeches. And this is something where, how do we, it sounds strange, drill the organization that in case of an attack, we are reacting correctly, speedy, to first keep the attack as small as possible, but to also stay operational. And this is something where you're getting arguments like, it's disrupting the business, we need to be operational, we don't have the time for it. So there is where the business is pushing back. But if you don't train your organization what can happen and how to react, you're always passive, and the impact will be much bigger than you have a trained organization. And military training is, let's say, on purpose. If you don't train your military forces, you're lost.
You need effectively fire doors. That if a fire breaks out, a fire door comes down, the fire doesn't spread. Very briefly, if we can, Paul, last to you, what's the big threat that you see right now?
No, so at Checkpoint, what worries us consistently is half-finished projects. So we are part of a supply chain in cyber, and we often see these half-finished projects that the collateral damage tarnishes vendor reputations, and it ultimately does not reduce the risk that was required.
Okay, and I'm guessing there's a lot of half-finished projects out there, given how quickly things move. It's been fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much indeed. Eoin Fleming, Sarah Drew, Paul Garvey, and Dietmar Bettio, ladies and gentlemen.